News without exception.
News without bias. Serving you the hottest and the most leading news of the hour.
Your number one TV news network, 678 F News.
Live from F News headquarters, your reporters, Ray Joseph G. Inocencio,
Joan Dalisay,
Ace Rupon.
Annalisa Enrique.
Good morning, Philippines. Good morning, Romblon. You are tuning into 678 F News.
Today, we have invited our special guest from the Romblon State University, Dr. Ray Joseph Inocencio. He will give us a background of ethical decision-making frameworks that will guide us along the way to make informed decisions. Let's hear more of that from Dr. Inocencio.
Good evening, everyone, and good morning to Ma'am Edith Padama in Canada. Tonight, allow me to share with you one of the existing frameworks the school managers are currently using as basis for ethical decisions in managing the organization. In behalf of the Frameworkers Group, I am Sir R.J. Inocencio, and I will be your facilitator for tonight. This framework is designed as an introduction to thinking ethically. We all have an image of our better selves, of how we are when we act ethically or at our best. And we probably have an image of what an ethical community, an ethical business, an ethical government, or an ethical society should be. Ethics really has to do with all these levels, acting ethically as individuals, creating ethical organizations and governments, and making our society as a whole ethical in the way it treats everyone. So in this framework, we have 5 steps, namely, recognize an ethical issue. Second, get the facts. Third, evaluate alternative actions. Fourth, make a decision and test it. And lastly, number 5, act and reflect on the outcome. First, we have to recognize an ethical issue. So this could mean identifying the problem and who is involved. Consider the relevant facts, laws, and principles. Ethical issues arise when ethically defensive response is unclear or contested, and when it is difficult to prioritize or accommodate and reconcile between different principles and values and or moral beliefs. Ethical issues may also arise when principles and values conflict with one another. So in this stage, you could also ask the following questions. Could this decision or situation be damaging to someone or to some group? Does this decision involve a choice between a good and bad alternative, or perhaps between 2 goods and 2 bad? Another, is this issue about more than what is legal or what is most efficient? If so, how? The second one is get the facts. Some moral issues create controversies simply because we do not bother to check the facts. But having the facts is not enough. Facts by themselves only tells us what is, they do not tell us what ought to be. So in this stage, you could also ask the following questions. What are the relevant facts of the case? What facts are not known? Can I learn more about the situation? Do I know enough to make a decision? What individuals and groups have an important stake in the outcome? Are some concerns more important, and why? Also, what are the options for acting? Have all the relevant persons and groups been consulted? Have I identified creative options? So the third one is to evaluate alternative actions. Evaluate alternatives by examining the benefits and drawbacks of each alternative. During the evaluation of alternatives, careful consideration is given to social, economic, and ecological factors that influence the predicted outcome. Philosophers have developed 5 different approaches to values to deal with moral issues. First, the utilitarian approach, which tells us which option will produce the most good and do the less harm. Second, the rights approach, which tells us which option best respects the rights of all who have a stake. Next, we have the justice approach, which tells us which option treats people equally or proportionately. Another, the common good approach, which tells us which option best serves the community as a whole, not just some members. And lastly, the virtue approach, which tells us which option leads me to act as the sort of person I want to be. And step number 4 is to make a decision and test it. Ethical decision making refers to the process of evaluating and choosing among alternatives in a manner consistent with ethical principles. So in making ethical decisions, it is necessary to perceive and eliminate unethical options and select the best ethical alternative. And step number 5, and the last, act and reflect on the outcome. How can my decisions be implemented with the greatest care and attention to the concern of all stakeholders? How did my decision turn out, and what have I learned from this specific situation? So there are two fundamental problems in identifying the ethical standards we are to follow. First, on what do we base our ethical standards? Second, how do those standards get applied to a specific situation that we face? If our ethics are not based on feelings, religion, law, accepted social practice, or science, what are they based on? Many philosophers and ethicists have helped us answer this critical question. So they have suggested at least 5 different sources of ethical standards we should use. So the first one is the utilitarian approach. To analyze an issue using the utilitarian approach, we first identify the various courses of action that is available to us. Second, we ask who will be affected by each action and what benefits or harms will be derived from each other. And third, we choose the action that will produce the greatest benefits and the least harm. The ethical action is the one that provides the greatest good for the greatest number. Next, we have the rights approach. The rights approach focused on the individual's rights to choose for herself or himself. What makes human beings different from mere things is that people have dignity based on their ability to choose freely what they will do with their lives. And they have fundamental moral right to have these choices respected. People are not objects to be manipulated. It is a violation of human dignity to use people in the ways they do not freely choose. Next, we have the fairness or justice approach. The basic moral question in this approach is, how fair is an action? Does it treat everyone in the same way? Or does it show favoritism and discrimination? Favoritism gives benefits to some people without a justifiable reason for singling them out. Discrimination imposes burdens on people who are no different from those on whom burdens are not imposed. So both favoritism and discrimination are unjust and wrong. And the next one is the common good approach. So this approach to ethics assumes a society comprising individuals whose own good is inextricably linked to the good of the community. Community members are bound with the pursuit of common values and goals. So in this approach, we focus on ensuring that the social policies, social systems, institutions, and environments on which we depend are beneficial to all. And the last one, the virtue approach. So the virtue approach to ethics assumes that there are certain ideals toward which we should strive, which provide for the full development of our humanity. These ideals are discovered through thoughtful reflection on what kind of people we have the potential to become. Virtues are attitudes or character traits that enable us to be and to act in ways that people want to develop our highest potential. They enable us to pursue the ideals we have adopted: honesty, courage, compassion, generosity, fidelity, integrity, fairness, self-control, and prudence are examples of virtues. Virtues are like habits that is, once acquired, they become characteristic of a person. So each of the approaches help us determine what standards of behavior can be considered ethical. There are still problems to be solved, however. So the first problem is that we may not agree on the contents of some of the specific approaches. We may not all agree to the same set of human and civil rights. We may not agree on what constitutes the common good. We may not agree on what is good and what is harm. The second problem is that the different approaches may not all answer the question, what is ethical? So, nonetheless, each approach gives us important information with which to determine what is ethical in a particular circumstance. And much more often than not, the different approaches do lead to similar answers. So, in making good ethical decision requires trained sensitivity to ethical issues and a practice method for exploring the ethical aspects of a decision and weighing the consideration that should impact our choice big course of action. So having a method for ethical decision making is absolutely essential. So the more novel and difficult the ethical choice we face, the more we need to rely on discussion and dialogue with others about the dilemma. So only by careful exploration of the problem, aided by the insights and different perspectives of others, can we make good ethical choices in such situations. So we have found the following framework for ethical decision making a useful method for exploring ethical dilemmas and identifying ethical courses of action. So we hope that the information above is helpful in developing our own experience in making choices. That's all, and thank you.
Trivia ethics. Did you know that Immanuel Kant is famous for the categorical imperative and the Kantian philosophy? To know more about these foundations of ethical framework, let's hear more of that from Joan Delisay.
As school administrators, principals, educators, and managers like us, we are often faced with ethical dilemmas in our everyday function. From the identification of problems, to research, development, and even the policy making of the wide organizational goals and policies. We undergo a process of decision making. And today, we will look into the deontological theory of Immanuel Kant. Shannon Bowen from the University of Houston published an article entitled The Practical Model for Ethical Decision Making in Issues Management and Public Relations. And this is grounded on the Kantian philosophy, which we will further talk about. But first, let us try to define ethics. According to Beck in 1963, ethics is the division of the universal practical philosophy, which deals with the intrinsic goodness found in some, but not in all actions, dispositions, and maxims. Maxim is a principle on which a particular subject fact acts. It was explained by Sullivan that the source of moral decision-making is the rational intellect rather than the rules prescribed by religions or lawmakers. Rationalism is the belief that by reason alone, humans can gain knowledge of the nature of something. This view considers faith, habit, prejudice, and religion to be irrational and prefers ethical decisions to be guided by deductive reasoning. Kant defined reason as the faculty of principles. Rationality is the guide that Kant used to endow all humans with freedom of choice and a duty to fulfill the moral law. Kant, held that even the most hardened criminals knows he or she is acting against the moral law because of his or her capacity for rational thought. Kant believed that the universality is the key to the law of autonomy, and he believed that this idea of the will of every rational being is the will that constitutes the universal law. Autonomy is essential to ethical decision-making because it frees the decision-maker from the subjective concerns of personal desires, fears of negative repercussions, or other biased decision-making influences. Therefore, autonomy is the freedom to make a decision based on what is morally right in a universal sense rather than self-interested concerns. The practical model of ethical issues management begins by asking the decision maker to address the Kantian proto-norm in the autonomy section of the model. Here, the model asks the decision maker to rule out prudential self-interest, greed, and selfish motives by posing the questions: am I acting from the basis of reason alone? Can I rule out political influence, monetary influence, and pure self-interest? If the answer is yes, then the issues manager can proceed to the next step in the model for analysis of the ethical dilemma and on toward decision-making. But if the answer is no, subjectivity has been revealed and the decision maker must step aside and defer the decision to another manager or a group of decision-making process. The model proceeds to the most rigorous test of deontological philosophy, which is Kant's categorical imperative. Categorical imperatives are rules of morality that must be done by everyone. This is done from the respect of moral laws. Kant maintained that the principle of moral action must be the same for every rational agent. No rational agent is entitled to make arbitrary exceptions to moral law in favor of himself. The categorical imperative includes the principle of reversibility. The decision maker see the merit of the decision were he or she on the receiving end of such a decision. Questions such as, what if everyone acted that way? Would I be willing to live in a world in which everyone acted like that? This explains the universal and reversible norms. As opposed to utilitarianism's worth in producing the greatest good for the greatest number, Kant placed the highest worth on performing one's moral duty. The categorical imperative provides a norm of morality that helps the decision maker understand his or her duty in a situation by allowing the agent to universalize the moral principle. Example, the maxim, I will lie only in instances where I will not get caught. This becomes impossible to universalize and it is self-contradictory. It is impossible mainly because the liar cannot universalize this action, this principle, because then it would be hard for us to distinguish which is true and who is lying and who is not lying, or who is telling the truth. The truth becomes impossible to discover. Moreover, it is doubtful that the liar would also want to live in a world wherein everyone is also lying, similar to him or her, because then his or her own lie would be impossible to believe. A lie is only successful if there is an assumption of truth on the part of the receiver. If you look at the ethical consideration triangle, each point of the triangle corresponds to one of Kant's formulations of the categorical imperative: duty, dignity and respect for others, and intention or a morally good will. Under each label is a question that explains the concept. The questions are: duty, am I doing the right thing? Dignity and respect, Are dignity and respect for others maintained? And lastly, intention. Am I proceeding with a morally good will? In his discussion of dignity and respect to others, Kant required that people should be treated always as an end in themselves and never as a means to an end. We are not mere objects that exist to be used by others. We as humans have the ability to set our goals and to work toward our goals. To treat someone as an end to herself. Okay? This means that you recognize the humanity of the person that you are encountering. This imbues us with an absolute moral worth. Or manipulate other autonomous agent for our own personal interest or benefit. Positioned inside the triangle in arbitrary order are the groups managers should consider with respect to their dignity, duty and respect, and intention. These groups are publics, stakeholders, self, the organization, and society. Issue managers should consider each of these groups with each point of the triangle corresponding to an aspect of Kantian theory. The last phase of implementing the practical model is to communicate ethical considerations to the groups inside the ethical consideration triangle and to consider their input in decision making. Through such consideration, a more equitable and mutually satisfactory decision can be reached than with non-symmetrical methods. The information gained from publics could play a vital role in the decision-making process of the organization. The communication should be ongoing and used to contribute to the decision-making process as well as to communicate with publics about the decision. So this ends my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. Again, my name is Joanne Dalisay from the group of Frameworkers. Have a nice day.
Up next, 3 school heads will be interviewed on their 3 perspectives on the 3 ethical frameworks. Let's hear it from Ace Rufon.
Hi, Miss Jo. I'm here in one of the schools in the district of Santa Fe, San Jose to report to you the specific framework used by the school head in making their decisions ethically. I think that school heads followed a specific ethical framework in deciding some ethical concerns. I believe that ethics provides a set of standards for behavior that help us decide how we ought to act in a range of situations. In a sense, we can say that ethics is all about making choices and about providing reasons why we should make these choices. Moreover, ethics is sometimes conflated or confused with other ways of making choices, including religion, law, or morality. Decisions should about right and wrong permeate everyday life. Ethics should concern all levels of life, such as in acting properly as individuals, creating responsible organizations and governments, and making our society as a whole more ethical. This news report will tackle more on making ethical decisions through the application of some ethical frameworks. It recognizes that decisions about right and wrong can be difficult and may be related to individual contexts. It first provides a summary of major sources for ethical thinking and then presents a framework for decision making. I'm here in Agmanic Elementary School since this school is a fan of consequentialist framework in making their decisions ethically with regards to managing their school operations and treating their teachers, pupils, and parents. According to OIC Magbanua, they prefer to follow the consequentialist framework because they believe that school can successfully operate if they focus on the future effects of their actions in managing their school following the ethical standards.
Our school was big fan of consequentialist framework because Agmanic Elementary School was very attentive to the future effects of our actions And of course, Agmanic Elementary School was also very focused on the effect that our people, our internal and external stakeholders may experience based on the course of actions. If, for example, the school will be strict in the management, what would be the effect of this to our stakeholders? It seems that the schools aim toward producing the most good. Agmanic Elementary School is looking to achieve the best consequences and believe in the deliberate process of what kind of outcomes should the school produce. Say for example, if the teachers are not religious and honest in disposing their duties and obligations, what would be the effect of this? To the school, to the parents, pupils, and stakeholders.
Thank you, Madam Pe. According to my research study, consequentialist framework focuses on the future effects of the possible course of action, considering the people who will be directly or indirectly affected. The leader asked about what outcomes are desirable in a given situation and considered ethical conduct to be whatever will achieve the best consequences. The leader or person using the consequentialist framework desires to produce the most good. Among the most advantages of this ethical framework is that a leader focuses on the result of that action is a pragmatic approach. It helps in situations involving many people, some of whom may benefit from the action while others may not. On the other hand, it is not always possible to predict the consequences of an action. So some actions that are expected to produce good consequences might actually end up harming people. Additionally, subordinates or workers sometimes react negatively to the use of compromise, which is inherent part of this approach. And they recoil from the implication that the end justifies the means. It also does not include a pronouncement that certain things are always wrong, as even the most heinous actions may result in a good outcome for some people, and this framework allows for this action to then be ethical. However, Ginpuengan Elementary School employed the duty framework in deciding ethical issues in their school. In my research study, the duty framework focuses on the duties and obligations that members of the organization have in a given situation, and considered what ethical obligations they have and what things they should never do. Ethical conduct in this framework is defined by doing one's duties and doing the right thing, and the goal is performing the correct action. This framework has the advantage of creating a system of rules that has consistent expectations of all people. If an action is ethically correct or a duty is required, it would apply to every person in a given situation. This even-handedness encourages treating everyone with equal dignity and respect. This framework also focuses on the following moral rules or duty regardless of outcome. So it allows for the possibility that one might have acted ethically even if there is a bad result. Therefore, this framework works best in situations where there is a sense of obligation or in those in which we need to consider why duty or obligation mandates or forbids certain courses of action. However, this framework also has its limitations. First, it can appear cold and impersonal in that it might require actions which are known to produce harms, even though they are strictly in keeping with a particular moral rule. It also does not provide a way to determine which duty we should follow if we are presented with a situation in which two or more duties conflict. It can also be rigid in applying the notion of duty to everyone, regardless of personal situation. Let us listen to what Miss Lelanie S. Tumbagahon, the head teacher 2 of Ganpuengan Elementary School, say about the duty framework.
Hello, Sir Ace. Ganpuengan Elementary School has been following the duty framework because we were aiming to perform the right action. If the school has report of behavioral problem, we then call the attention of the parents or guardian concerned. The school has the direct attention to the duties of the school that existed prior to the situation and determines our obligation. We always believe and conduct doing the right thing and never failing to do our duty. Every time there were situations in school that call our immediate attention, Ganpuengan Elementary School always do our obligations and will never do any actions that can give negative impact.
Meanwhile, Ms. Richen S. Sigilian, head teacher 2 of Magsaysay Elementary School, will give her thoughts about virtue framework since this framework was followed by Magsaysay Elementary School.
Say Elementary School was a great follower of the virtue framework. Our school attempted to discern character traits which include the virtues and vices that are motivating the people involved in the situation. The school aimed to develop teachers' characters and firmly believed that fully virtuous person would do in the circumstances. I think that we have followed a process wherein we try to question ourselves with what kind of persons should teachers be and what will the teacher's actions show about our character.
In addition, the leaders in the virtue framework try to identify the character traits, whether it is positive or negative, which might motivate the workers in a given situation. The leader is concerned with what kind of person they should be and what actions indicate about their character. The leader defines ethical behavior as whatever a virtuous person would do in the situation, and they seek to develop similar virtues. Obviously, this framework is useful in situations that ask what sort of person one should be, as a way of making sense of the world. It allows for a wide range of behaviors to be called ethical, as there might be many different types of good character and many paths to developing it. Consequently, it takes into account all parts of human experience and their role in ethical deliberation, as it believes that all of one's experiences, emotions, and thoughts can influence the development of one's character. Although this framework takes into account a variety of human experience, it also makes it more difficult to resolve disputes, as there can often be more disagreement about virtuous traits than ethical actions. Also, because the framework looks at character, it is not primarily or particularly good at helping someone to decide what actions to take in a given situation or determine the rules that would give one's action. Because it emphasizes the importance of role models and education to ethical behavior, it can sometimes merely reinforce current cultural norms as the standard of ethical behavior. In putting the frameworks together and by framing the situation or choice we are facing, specific features will be brought into focus more clearly. However, it should be noted that the frameworks have its limits. By focusing our attention on one set of features, and other important features may be obscured. Hence, it is important to be familiar with the frameworks and to understand how they relate to each other, where they may overlap, and where they may differ. The chart presented is designed to highlight the main contrast between the frameworks on the deliberative process, focus, definition of ethical conduct, and motivation. Because the answers to the three main types of ethical questions asked by each framework are not mutually exclusive. Each framework can be used to make at least some progress in answering the questions posed by the other two. In many situations, all the frameworks will result in the same, or at least very similar, conclusions about what leaders should do, although they will typically give different reasons for reaching this conclusion. However, because they focus on different ethical features, the conclusions reached through one framework will occasionally differ from the conclusions reached through one or both of the others. When using the frameworks to make ethical judgments about a specific cases, it will be useful to follow the process. First, recognizing an ethical issue. One of the most important things to do at the beginning of ethical deliberations is to locate, to the extent possible, the specifically ethical aspects of the issue at hand. Sometimes, what happens to an ethical dispute is really a dispute about facts or concepts. For example, some utilitarians might argue that the death penalty is ethical because it deters crime and thus produces the greatest amount of good with the least harm. Other utilitarians, however, might argue that the death penalty does not deter crime and thus produces more than harm or more harm than good. The argument here is over which facts argue for the morality of a particular action, not simply over the morality of a particular principles. All utilitarians would abide by the principle of producing the most good with the least harm. Second, consider the parties involved. Another important aspects to reflect upon are the various individuals and groups who may be affected by your decision. Consider who might be harmed or who might benefit. Third, gather all of the relevant information. Before taking action, it is a good idea to make sure that you have gathered all the pertinent information and that all potential sources of information have been consulted. Fourth, formulate actions and consider alternatives. Fourth, formulate actions and consider alternatives. Evaluate your decision-making options by asking the following questions. First question, which action will produce the most good and do the least harm? Second, which action respects the rights of all who have stake in the decision? Third, which action treats people equally? Fourth, which action serves the community as a whole, not just some members? And the last, which action leads me to act as the sort of person I should be? Then, make a decision and consider it. After examining all of the potential actions which best address the situation, how do I feel about my choice? After that, act. Many ethical situations are uncomfortable because you can never have all of the information. Even so, we must often take action. And finally, reflect on the outcome. What were the results of my decision? What were the intended and unintended consequences? Would I change anything now that I have been seeing the consequences? In conclusion, making ethical decisions requires sensitivity to the ethical implications of problems and situations. It also requires practice. Having a framework for ethical decision making is essential. Mr. H.B. Rufon reporting for F News. Back to you, Ms. Jo.
As a leader, decisions about right and wrong percolate everyday life. Making a good ethical issues and a practice method for exploring the ethical aspects of a decision and weighing the considerations that should impact our choice of a course of action. To know more about these, let's hear from Annalisa Enrique for the details of existing ethical frameworks in institutions.
Retaining a method for ethical decision-making is essential. Ethics should agitate all degrees of life, such as acting properly as individuals, creating responsible organizations and governments. There are various approaches that every leader does in deliberating critical decisions. A biography documentary video was conducted showcasing an example of ethical framework in weighing crucial and hard decisions.
Good afternoon, sir. Thank you so much for your time. Can I have your precious time as School Principal 3 of one of the prestigious school in the division of Romblon? Sir Erwin, this is my question. Is okay for you, sir?
Yes.
Okay, my question number 1 is, sir, what are the consequences if leaders don't behave ethically?
Good morning, Ma'am Ana. So, the consequences when leaders don't behave ethically, and everything rises and falls on leadership. When leaders don't behave ethically, their members are more likely going to follow the same path. Members can also become defiant when they are told to behave one way but their leaders do otherwise. So it's a ripple effect. It has much bigger price to pay. A leader's unethical behavior can apparently destroy the whole system. So I think that's the best answer I could give you if leaders don't behave ethically in leading a certain school.
Thank you so much, sir. And the question number 2 is, what does leading with ethics means to you?
Leading with ethics means to me, so as me being a leader, for me leadership is all about modeling. Leading with ethics boils down to the golden rule: do unto others what you want others to do unto you. If I expect my followers to respect me, I must first respect them. If I expect them to perform well for the school, I myself must perform well for them. So people always want to be loved, as appreciated and understood, and these two should start with me. So I think that's the best example for me as a leader, to do leadership with ethics.
Well said, sir. And for the last question, sir, this question fits to you as leader, of course. And the question is, what does your favorite ethical framework best for you as leader or administrator?
My favorite ethical framework, of course, my favorite ethical framework stems from John Maxwell's "Earn trust by doing the right thing." It works best for me because it helps me make the right things the main thing in everything I do. I become it becomes easier for me to give my followers responsibility, authority, and accountability because they trust that I am doing the right thing. So this ethical framework guarantees maximum performance and productivity from everyone in the organization. So I think that's the best framework I could give them, because I believe that in doing so, in giving them the trust and also earning the trust and doing the right thing is the best thing that I could give as a leader and as an example to them.
Thank you so much, sir, for your time. And I believe that you as mentor and leader has a mentee like me that your influence go beyond the right thing and the good thing that you shared with us as your subordinate. Thank you so much for the time, sir.
Thank you also.
One of the keys to doing well in any profession is living ethically, inside and outside of work. Establishing frameworks will essentially help not just every leader, but each of us in making decisions. Here are the 4 frameworks in decision making which will be tackling that exist in some of the institutions. First and foremost, the utilitarianism. Some ethicists begin by asking, how will this course of action impact everyone affected? Emphasizing the consequences of our actions. Utilitarianism, a results-based approach, says that the ethical action is the one that produces the greatest balance of good over harm for as many stakeholders as possible. It requires an accurate determination of the likelihood of a particular result and its impact. For example, the ethical corporate action, then, is the one that produces the greatest good and does the least harm for all who are affected: customers, employees, shareholders, the community, and the environment. Next, the moral relativism approach, on the other hand, suggests that what is ethical behavior in one culture may be considered unethical in another. This theory requires, when making a moral judgment about a person, the attitudes of the community, the person is a member of must be considered. Then, the justice view approach, which talks about the idea that each person should be given their due. And what people are due is often interpreted as fair or equal treatment. Equal treatment implies that people should be treated as equals according to some defensible standards such as merit or need, but not necessarily that everyone should be treated in the exact same in every respect. There are different types of justice that address what people are due in various contexts. These include social justice, structuring the basic institution of society; distributive justice, distributing benefits and burdens; interpersonal justice, an ethical framework that focuses on the communication within a relationship. The essence of this justice view is that the manner in which we communicate determines whether or not justice has been violated. Procedural justice follows that as long as the protocols and rules are followed, procedural justice has not been violated, and commutative justice is determined based on all parties having full knowledge of the relationship or transaction. And the last ethical framework, which talks about corporate social responsibility, which is a self-regulating model that helps an institution be socially accountable to itself and stakeholders in the public. By practicing corporate social responsibility, institutions can be conscious of the kind of impact they are having on all aspects of the society, including economic, social, and environmental. If these frameworks, when practiced regularly, the method becomes familiar that we work through it automatically without consulting the specific steps. The more novel and difficult the ethical choice we face, the more we need to rely on discussion and dialogue with others about the dilemma. Only by careful exploration of the problem, aided by insights and different perspectives of others, we can make good ethical decisions in such situations. Annalisa Enrique, reporting.